On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Dina Bruzek. She is the SVP of Product and Engineering at Huntress. We're going to be talking about a really interesting topic that every company is facing, and it's only getting worse and probably will get worse as people are staying remote and finding that the culture is not shifting back to the office as much as we thought. And it's about retention. How you keep people engaged? How do you stay proactive? How do you have your team constantly be interviewing and balance the work they're doing in hopes of not having to backfill? And very important topic given how challenging the market is, especially in engineering. And Dina's got a great background to talk about this. I'm excited to have her on. Thanks for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. So two things. One, let everyone know what Huntress does. And then also, as the SVP of Product Engineering, what falls in your lap?
Yeah, absolutely. So Huntress is cybersecurity for the 99%. And what we mean by that is most enterprises have some sort of security. They have some sort of IT staff. But the bulk of companies out there, small companies, they don't have the manpower, they don't have the resources, they can't afford the technology. So we call it cybersecurity for the 99%, those below the poverty line. Our mantra is we are elevating the SMB through education and training and awareness, one hacker at a time. And for my job from SVP of Product and Engineering, I have the funnest job in the entire company. I'm responsible for not only building the products, but also figuring out what we're going to build. So we take the product strategy, we take the vision and the mission from the CEO and the CTO. We get that on paper. We build out a product strategy. We build out a roadmap that is derived from that strategy. We get that into engineering, into sprints, into stories, and then the engineering team executes on it.
Awesome. I'm sure wearing both those hats keeps you busy, and that could be a whole different topic for a whole different day. But I guess this podcast episode, we're going to be talking about really the makeup of your team, given the fact that most everyone's been remote for now a while and might stay remote for God knows how long. Retention becomes an interesting challenge. And as the market is staying really hot and should not cool off that much, I suppose, for technical talent, keeping people is definitely part of the trick. Finding people is hard. And I guess finding people and keeping them engaged remote, these are all challenges everyone's kind of facing. And I think, just to start things off, talk about your team in terms of, I believe you guys are fully remote. Maybe talk about how long it's been that way and kind of how you guys actually run some of whether you're Scrum or what kind of Agile you're running.
Absolutely. So this is the first company that I've been at that's been fully remote. Huntress was remote before remote was a cool thing to be. So they, at their inception in 2015, they decided that they prioritized more was finding the talent versus restricting themselves to that regional area. And my 31 experience of engineering, management, and development has been always co-location, having all engineers in a single office. So this is a unique challenge for me for sure. So, and couple that with the fact that everybody's remote now. And so now you're suddenly competing against everybody. It really brings new challenges to the table, and it's a completely different world. Being remote brings all kinds of new and interesting challenges that I've never really, as an engineering or product leader, I've never had to face before in keeping everybody engaged. So I would say we're traditional agile, but I like to have my team do things that works for the teams. I think that's one of the things about retaining folks is autonomy. And I'm slowly learning, very quickly learning that autonomy is really key and important. And Agile is all about these self-organizing teams. We have two different structures. We have the engineering structure and then we have the management structure. The engineering structure, the day-to-day place that the people live, they live in their feature delivery team. So we have a full stack and we deliver features. We like to say we deliver business value. So we don't have an agent team and a portal team. We have a delivery team and we deliver features. This way we don't have to coordinate delivery or timing across multiple teams. We can build it all together. And it also allows us to scale up and scale down very quickly.
Awesome. That's some interesting. I would probably dive into that as a whole episode. I might have to come back. So in terms of, this is your first exposure to a fully remote company. I guess now you've been at Huntress for a while. I mean, it's been over a year from what I saw on LinkedIn. I guess kind of compare and contrast, some of what you're seeing, maybe just from your personal, management change, or maybe your style hasn't changed. I don't know. Has your management style changed just for being fully remote, or have you been pretty consistent from what you did previously when you were, in the office?
My management style has definitely changed. There's no question. Not only am I getting older, but hopefully wiser as well. So definitely from that perspective, but definitely I have had to open up my mind on how we manage folks and how we manage people. I mean, things have changed, just drastically in the last 20 years, not only from a technology standpoint, but people's expectations and software developers, particularly, they're just so sought after now. Everything has some software based, some software in it that they're just so sought after. And then, couple that with the incredibly tough market that we're in. You have the big resignation. Suddenly you're in a different world. And when I look back in fond memories of some of the companies I've worked at where we had Beer Friday, where we had everybody in a conference room every Friday, and we just had different people speak and being able to build that connectedness. And it was easier to do, to be able to have, our weekly release meetings, or I watched the teams go out to lunch together and to build that connectedness. And all of a sudden, you don't have that anymore. And how do you replace that in a fully remote environment? So that just brings a whole new element. So not only are you now trying to deliver product, you're trying to bring a level of engagement that was natural before. And suddenly you have to be, very purposeful about it. It has to be a thing that you're thinking about constantly. It's just not, you just can't go and tap the person on the next shoulder. You have to arrange for people to meet. And how do you create that environment for them to be able to do that?
Absolutely. And that kind of ties in, in terms of when we're talking about retention, obviously retention a lot of times is viewed as a reactive step. You're trying to, save the employee from walking out the door to another job. And a lot of what we should be focused on is being proactive, keeping people engaged so that they're hopefully happy. Obviously, people can't be happy indefinitely, but being remote all of a sudden now, like you mentioned, they're not there. You can't see somebody, look them in the eye, get that feel of how they're doing day to day. I mean, some of that's got to be making it much harder from the engagement side, which obviously could be impacting retention.
Absolutely. I mean, so from a retention, perspective, at the very base of it, you have your total comp package, right? And that is, your base salary, your benefits. And you've got to get creative today with your benefits, 401k contributions without matching. You need bonuses, retention bonuses, other types of bonuses. And of course, because you're remote, the regional cost of living goes out the window. Everybody wants a Silicon salary from that perspective. So all of that is there and it remains. But now people have this higher level of expectation of engagement and building this supportive environment that you have to have. You have to go out of your way for team building exercises, having little competitions, bringing the developers together. You have to connect with your people in a way that you've never had to connect with them before. So it's about understanding what motivates them. Everybody has a different level of motivation. And so how do you understand their motivations? How do you connect with them? How do you build that bond, that level of trust so that they can be vulnerable, that supportive environment? Those are all things that, now have to be done on steroids because it's a completely remote environment. It's that challenges of that lack of face-to-face. You can't see anybody below the shoulder. So you can't read their body language. You can see their eyes. You don't really know, are they really looking at the camera? Are they really looking at you? Are they really even listening to you? So how do you bring them into there? And so you have to give them these very safe spaces and you have to make them feel heard. They really want to be heard. And on top of all of that, you've got to give them more flexibility because they're at home and they have more challenges. So just that whole piece of engagement and building trust, connectedness, and allowing people to feel safe. It's different than I've ever experienced.
That's interesting. And I guess when you're talking about safe spaces, can you maybe just dive in and tell us what that means in terms of the context of how you're seeing it?
So, in a normal world, I remember in the old days, somebody broke the build, and might be an email or whatever, but it was somewhat impersonable. Somebody may feel offended or whatever. But now you're on Slack and there's no tone in that communication. You can't walk over to somebody's desk and say, hey, you broke the build or you made a mistake. You broke the dashboard. You did this. And so now everything you say on Slack has no tone, has no expression. So you have to be so careful what you say. And how do you give them that space where they can say, hey, I broke this, really sorry, guys. And they're not worried about the repercussions. And, and in this environment of hiring, it's interesting because the moment that they feel, picked on, then they're going to leave, right? I mean, if you don't have that supportive, connective environment, then they just won't engage. And then you just get this lack of engagement, poor morale, poor team spirit. And that culture becomes even more important when you're trying to retain trying to build the team in that environment. So it just changes that whole dynamics. So people have to be safe to ask the question. It's not like I can go to my buddy right next door and say, hey, I don't know how to get access to this thing. Can you tell me how? You've got to go out, into these channels and, who knows how to do this? You're new. How do you get access to things? How do you feel not conscientious about the questions that you're asking? That no stupid question thing. How do you give them that space and to make them feel like they are part of a team and that they belong?
I guess when maybe you have some insights you can share with everyone, because I think that is a big issue. The verbal cues being gone in itself is a challenge, and then replace that with just dry words and Slack. It's a massive communication gap in terms of how that message gets delivered. In the case of what you've seen, let's say somebody does break the build, right? Like you mentioned before, you go over there. I mean, how does your team deliver that message? Is it done via Zoom, separate Slack channel? Like, how would the team go about, making sure that person, you can have that conversation so that, again, you don't want to lose that engagement. You don't want somebody to not feel like, oh, I have to walk on pins and needles. I don't want to be the one who makes a mistake, but yet we've got to address issues. We can't not address them.
Yeah. I mean, full disclosure, I think we're still working on that to some extent, and so we have many different Slack channels, and we're very different from many companies. We're all about transparency. So almost all of our channels are public channels. So anybody, even though you might have an engineering channel, you might have an engineering internal channel, all of the channels are really public and anybody can join. So it even makes it even more challenging to create that safe space. So if somebody makes a mistake, then it needs to be done privately. What they say is, punish in private and reward in public, or something along those lines, right? You want to be able to, if somebody does something good, you want to be able to go out publicly and cheer them on. And if you see a behavior that you don't want to encourage, then it has to be done privately. But there still does have to be that engineering internal Slack channel where, hey, I'm having these challenges. What's going on? This isn't working, or this automation test is flaky. Do we know what's causing it? And you can't point the fingers at people. You have to create that safe environment. It happens before those Slacks happen. If you didn't create that safe space for them, if you didn't connect with them, if they're not connected to their team, if you didn't have that team building, if they don't feel like their management supports them, then they're not going to do it. And then the moment that somebody says, well, hey, who did this? Then they're going to feel like, oh my God, I'm being picked on, or am I going to get fired, or what did I do wrong? And so those things. So it's quite challenging to create that environment in Slack, especially when all these channels are public. And that's a unique challenge a little to Huntress, but it's very interesting. And the upper management, the executive team, tries to create this environment where everybody should feel safe. They don't understand. Why doesn't everybody just feel safe? Why can't they just say stuff? Why don't they do that? And it just doesn't work that way, especially on the engineering side. Mostly they're introverts, right? They are already going to be reluctant to be able to go out and share. And so they're really reaching out of their comfort zone. An engineer yesterday told me, he said, hey, didn't you notice I delete half of my Slacks, and half the time I type them and then I end up not sending them? And so creating that space, it has to happen before that ever gets there.
What's happening is the work is becoming it was already a complex relationship. It's actually become an even more complicated and complex relationship because, a lot of what we have going on in our personal lives, the relationships and how we have to manage them, that's actually becoming a bit trickier at work because it's like long distance relationships now. If anyone's been in a long distance relationship, those are, supposedly really hard. And now we're asking a manager to be responsible for multiple long distance relationships, but not only the manager, but the company then also has a relationship to employees. So there's these multi-faceted relationships that all have to happen without being ever in a room or seeing each other maybe once or twice a year, even if that. And I think, like you said, I appreciate you being transparent that you guys are still solving some of the problems. I don't think anyone has the silver bullet to this. I think everyone's, real time making the adjustments that they think best fit their company.
So you brought up something that's really important. And this is something I learned a few companies ago, and it's called attribution error. And it's about not understanding the motives, what's actually behind the motive. And it's assigning maliciousness or making personal the behavior that you're seeing. So like you're attributing some sort of malicious personal behavior behind it when it's probably not personal at all, and you completely misinterpret it. But time and space introduce attribution error. So if you don't see somebody for a while and you're not able to see their body language, you're not connecting with them, say you're working all day by yourself and never hear from anybody. oh my God, they're not happy with my work. They're avoiding me. They don't want to talk to me. So you all of a sudden your mind starts filling in all these holes. Or this, somebody's in a rush and they slack something off and, oh my God, what's his problem? Why is he so angry at me? What did I do wrong? And then they start to make these assumptions about the meanings of these things, or they just don't like my work, or they are, it could be all these different things. And you see it all of the time. I was having this conversation with myself and another one of my colleagues, my peers, the executive level about, so if you're not talking on a regular basis, if you're not able to express to each other often and get that human connection, then you just make up all of these things in your head about what they might be thinking. And that just, again, about the engineer who resigned, he had all of these things in his head. They don't care about diversity. They're not giving us autonomy. I can't do anything without asking for permission for this. All of these assumptions that they're making and creating this story in their head. And if you're not there to give them a different story, then all of that gets introduced. So definitely that time and space. So you have to come up with all these different reasons to have meetings, to connect people and to bring everybody together.
It's definitely an interesting component. And I think, retaining your talent, like you mentioned, in this market, losing someone is just catastrophe because it takes, weeks to find a replacement. So, like I mentioned, I guess at the top of the podcast, retention used to be a reactive statement of how you're dealing with employees. I think now we need to think about, well, how do I shift this to a proactive discussion and how do I keep them engaged? And like you mentioned, finding those safe spaces so people can actually talk about their feelings, emotions, and stay connected. Attribution error, I like that. Time and space, introduce attribution error, and isn't that the truth?
Yeah. And well, you talk about, losing people, not only how you're going to get the work done, you've made these commitments from a roadmap perspective, you have to deliver. But every time another employee leaves, people on the other side of the team, that they don't know, why did that person leave? What happened? And it's a lot of times it's personnel issues and you can't really tell them, hey, well, maybe they were poor performing or they were unhappy or whatever the case may be. And so it actually further degrades morale, further degrades that team spirit. So it's a double whammy. Not only are you not getting the work done, and it becomes this domino effect. Well, why is that guy leaving? Why is that guy leaving? So now you got to spend your time with the employees that are still there and convincing them, no, everything is good. And you have to repair that. So it's that constant balance. So it's a double whammy when somebody leaves. And then thirdly, that's a triple whammy because not only you still have to get the work done, it degrades morale, but now you got to replace them. And it's very difficult and challenging. Everybody we're making an offer to today has 2 or 3 other offers, often for more money. It's worse than bidding on a house. Like you go above list price and somebody still comes in above you and you don't even know what happened. And then you get this, well, I didn't like your tech stack. It's like, whoa, what was wrong with our tech stack? And it's just this whole thing, or you didn't give me enough PTO, or it's just this whole package. So it's so competitive now from that perspective. So yeah, when somebody leaves, you get it back in spades. So hanging on to every precious individual is really what you need to do. And I have been spending the bulk of my time understanding the culture, rebuilding the culture, listening to people, giving more autonomy, more flexibility, really understanding what's important to the people that work for me and the employees of the company. How do we make them feel supported? How do we make them feel connected? And again, goes beyond comp. So for sure.
Absolutely. Now, it's an awesome topic. I appreciate you coming on and sharing your thoughts. I think there's some really awesome points you made, and hopefully people will connect with it. If somebody wants to reach out to you to pick your brain, or maybe just connect via anything you mentioned on the podcast, is LinkedIn a good place to reach out to you?
Absolutely. LinkedIn's a great place.
Awesome. We'll include your LinkedIn in the show notes. So if somebody wants to reach out to Dina, feel free. And that's it for this episode. We'll be back again. Different guest, different topic. Until the next time, I always ask for 2 things. 1, if you do like the podcast, just share it with someone. That's how it's been growing. And I appreciate any time you guys do that. And secondly, if you want me to find a guest to talk about a specific podcast episode, let me know and I will do my best. And until next time, goodbye.